As a strength and conditioning coach, one of the things I get asked most frequently is, what should I be doing for my son or daughter to get them ready to play sports or be more successful in sports down the road? Now, this is usually asked from parents of youth athletes. And youth, that's kind of a broad term, I know. It can be athletes 8 to 12, even in the high school realm, but let's look at youth athletes as a whole. So before they get to high school, the biggest mistake parents make, hands down, is trying to specialize their son or daughter in one sport too early. Kids need exposure to different motor skills. They need exposure to different activities. They need to develop skills outside of what looks like their sport if you want to set them up for a healthy future and even a productive future as an athlete down the road. You know, the most common issue in relation to injury, especially from a soft tissue standpoint, is repetitive stressors of the same kind. And now we're seeing unprecedented levels of kids that have to get Tommy John surgeries, that have ACL tears, and parents wonder why. Well, not only are kids not going outside and playing more and doing things like that because they're stuck on video games, stuck on electronics, but you have sycophantic parents that think, oh, my 11-year-old's the next Nolan Ryan. And now all of a sudden their son is playing baseball in the summer. They're playing baseball in the fall. They got indoor leagues. They're still doing it in the spring. And there's just repetitive trauma because they think the more they play, the better chance they'll get. Nothing could be farther from the truth. You need to make sure at that level they are exposed to generalized activities. Get them involved in building different competencies. I mean, the majority of high-level athletes, Olympic medalists, all that, are multi-sport athletes, right? And there's also this obsession with competition. Parents think the only way they're going to get their son or daughter noticed for the scholarships or anything else is if they can constantly showcase them as, well, they're one of the best. They've got to compete in this, and next week they're competing in that. And it's really kind of scary because, again, the more you're competing, the less you're practicing and training and doing other general skills. Now, this isn't something that's really debatable. It's shown in the research again and again. Every time somebody plays a different sport, does a different activity, they're picking something up from that. So that's great if your son or daughter is quick and they seem fast and they do track and field and they really excel. But playing basketball or another multi-directional sport teaches them so much about how to drop their center of gravity, how to plant their foot, how to redirect force. And again, it gets them out of this repetitive tissue and overstress piece. And really this starts in schools too, because you see schools have taken out physical education. No longer kids really able to be exposed to different games, different forms of play where they can pick up all these things. And schools are a great example also because you see the obsession with testing there, all these advanced placement exams. So what we're doing to our kids physiologically really mimics to what we're doing them psychologically. We think that just more education, more test preps is better. You can't specialize. You want to really emphasize curiosity as they're growing. So if you have a young child, you have a young athlete, somebody that no matter how much they love sport, sometimes the best thing you can do is step back, slow cook, realize that create obstacle courses in your backyard, get them involved in other sports, even if they're not good at them. That's okay. You want to build that competency. You want to make sure they're exposed to these different things. Find ways to really encourage them to get outside and play, make dynamic environments. It also helps if you do that. So maybe you and your husband or wife or significant other go mountain biking. Maybe you guys go hiking. The point is at that age, at a young age, sometimes it's the stuff that seems so outside the bounds, so outside the scope, so unrelated is actually what's going to give them the skills they need to succeed later on. Another point, you've got to get rid of this idea of sport specificity. Everything your child does should not look like their sport. So say you do take them to a training facility. I know it seems like you want, well, sport-specific movements. Sally's a tennis player. Sport-specific movements. Juan's a soccer player, what have you. Through what we call the SAID principle in strength and conditioning, and SAID is an acronym. It means specific adaptations to an imposed demand. If you are doing the same thing again and again and again, to go back to the original message, they're not going to adapt. The body's an organism just like anything else. If you keep giving it the same stressor, it's never going to change because over time, just like your immune system, it learns how to deal with that stressor. That's why we're not susceptible to certain viruses again and again. The body builds up a defense system. The same thing happens in training. So if all they do is play soccer, Then they work on soccer skills, and they do stuff in the weight room that looks like soccer. You're not building this cachet of qualities that helps them become more robust and healthy down the road. A final point. Chronological age is very different than biological age. Some people think, well, when we look at chronological age, before we get into this, when we look at chronological age, that's how old the calendar says you are, right? So I'm 13, I was born on this date, so on and so forth. Biological age is the physiological maturation of one's body. And that has to do with the hormones, it has to do with bones, tissue, tendon growth, all these things. So in essence, all 13-year-olds aren't equal. So when you think, well, what's the perfect age for my son or daughter to start training? There's no magic age. You have to look at the development and the maturation of them physically as well. These things can't be assessed in a vacuum. So it's great if the next door neighbor is 13 and has started a really intense strength training regimen. That may not be right for your son or daughter. You've got to make sure that they're assessed correctly, that you have credible health professionals and medical professionals and performance professionals looking at them, and you've got to start slow. Starting slow is not just about play. It can be body weight exercises, the use of medicine balls, the use of kettlebells, and eventually the use of barbells. Now, is barbell training fine for an 11 or 12-year-old? Sure, as long as they're healthy. But again, it's the management of load, it's the management of activities, and it's thinking big picture. So just remember, your child is your ultimate investment. They're your ultimate investment. And you have to think in terms of compound interest. Don't try to rush this process, because you can't go back. And once they've had these injuries, once they've had these things, their life is never, ever the same. You've got to slow things down, invest in their health, in their enjoyment, and their positive associations with activity and sport over the long term, and realize that there is no hack or way to catch this up. And you really shouldn't be able to try to push them or thinking of pushing them to live out what your dreams and ideals are to begin with. If you want more tips on this, and we're going to explore a lot more concepts and questions that people really get in heated debates about, especially when it deals with proper training principles and things like this, make sure you guys subscribe. I try to share as much information as I can, as broadly as I can to help. And I want to hear what you deal with, what you struggle with. Feel free to debate below. All these things and all these conversations make us all better.